So yeah, here we are, getting ready to do the first podcast that I recorded with my father. Just some kind of notes about how we recorded this, because my father last October was diagnosed with cancer, colon cancer, and he had surgery, and there's been complications, and he's been kind of bedridden, and now he's in a nursing home, Grandview Heights in Marshalltown, and they're taking great care of him. And but that's where we recorded this, was in the nursing home. So it wasn't a controlled environment. As you listen to it, there's going to be like some background noise. You're going to hear like some like talking in the hallway. There's like some intercom stuff in the hallway. And occasionally he's like adjusting his chair because the physical therapist kind of told him that he needed to like be changing his position, sitting up and down. And occasionally people are coming in to check on him. So there's quite a few times where we paused on the recording. So just kind of know that this conversation was had in a nursing home. It's not like a studio. It's not a controlled environment, but it was fun to get some wisdom and some stories from a great podcaster. So super excited about this podcast with my father. Some ado, because I'm going to play this song that I wrote. But here we go. Let's kick it off. Traveler Diary, talking to Chuck Shockley.
If I had to say goodbye, I would be sad and I would miss you. But I would think back on our time together fondly. I love you, and I know that you love me. There are no questions left unanswered. There is no unfinished business. I wouldn't feel cheated if I had to say goodbye. If I had to say goodbye, I'd be okay. If I had to say goodbye, all the memories we made would stay with me. If I had to say goodbye, luckily, you're not gone yet. We still have memories to make, laughs to share, jokes to take. I will treasure every moment, but know that I'm not scared. Don't worry about what will happen. I guess I'm ready, thanks to you. If I had to say goodbye, if I had to say goodbye, I'd be okay. If I had to say goodbye, all the memories we made would stay with me. If I had to say goodbye, what a great life we shared. I'm so grateful to have known you. I wouldn't be who I am without you. If I had to say goodbye, I'd be okay. If I had to say goodbye, all the memories we made would stay with me. If I had to say goodbye.
Welcome to the Traveler Diaries, Dad. So the Traveler Diaries is a show that selfishly, its main purpose is just to promote me as an artist and a musician and help generate interest in my live shows. But the other thing my real thesis, I guess, or my inspiration is to have good conversations that are fun to have and that maybe you might learn something. So, I'm excited to have you talk about your experience in radio. And how many years have you been doing radio?
4 decades.
4 decades of radio. Is there a specific year you remember that you started?
I started in November of 1979. I worked for a FM radio station in Des Moines when I was still in college. The call letters were KDMI, and it was a gospel station that ran under the premise of making a profit, and then also ran under the premise of soliciting religious donations from its listeners. So it was kind of an oxymoron, and it was quite a place to break into the business. So that's where I got my start at. It was the last place I worked at in which the Associated Press machine was not on a high-speed printer, but on a slow purple printout type of basis with canary yellow paper that was circular on its dowel. And so it made a kind of a gentle noise as it printed out its news copies. So that's one of the things I remember about the place. They would sell religious programming on a cash and carry basis, and they did not tolerate religious deadbeats, if you will, of which there was some. And it was quite a place. The guy who ran the place was quite a character. You can still, if you go past the corner of Urbandale and Merle Hay Road, past a Red Wing shoe store, there's a little building that is rectangular. Used to have a brown cross outside, it no longer does. But that's where KDMI FM was located, at 97.7 FM. And that's where I began work in November of 1979.
And when did you know that you wanted to work in radio? Was it at a young age?
I was at a very young age. I was looking for something to do in life where I would be successful, halfway successful. So I knew when I was about, I'd say 12, perhaps 13 years old, what I wanted to do.
What you wanted to do. And that had to do with, I remember you telling me the story about having that boom box, or just being thrilled that you had this access.
I was enamored with listening to the radio. I was very frightened of storms at a young age, and so I used to lie in bed with a transistor radio and the covers up. I didn't think my parents wanted me to listen to radio on a loud basis late at night, so I'd lay in bed with a transistor radio and listen to severe weather coverage. And then I got my first cassette recorder as a young man and enjoyed inventing things, and got a lot of satisfaction and fun out of that process. So I was watching a film. I was in junior high, I was watching a film strip from the then Des Moines Technical High School, and one aspect of and they were promoting the different vocations that were available for study at Tech. One of them was radio, and Tech had a radio station, and one of the programs featured on the radio station was called Radio Reading for the Blind. And what that entailed was people would sit and read text verbatim out of the paper, which is not correct for the radio. And so...
In what way?
Just the way the copy is written.
Oh, the way that it's written is
the way the copy is grammatically written. And so I thought to myself at the time I could go on there and do a much better job than what I was hearing. Yet everybody who worked for KDPS-FM at Tech High, 88.1, did so on a volunteer basis. And it was truly a public radio operation at the time. It wasn't commercial, but it was public. And years later, when I was in Grandview, a student at Grandview College, we had an agreement with Tech for a couple hours of airtime every night. And then a couple times, I stepped beyond the boundaries of Grandview, and I went directly down to the Tech studios and did a show. I knew it was there. I knew they'd let me in. I called and asked for permission. And they had better equipment than we did at Grandview at the time.
At the time, yeah.
And so I would actually play a stop set consisting of 3 30 or 60-second public service announcements, and then I just play radio. I do weather at top of the hour, 20, 30, and 40 minutes past, and I play music, and anyway, I just played radio, and they weren't that happy with me, and I really wasn't happy with the students at Grandview and their dedication to learning radio and doing it properly.
Oh, Grandview wasn't happy with you for...
Well, they weren't either, because I wasn't a model student, to say the least.
So
college was a different experience for me. In retrospect, I should have gone to Tech for high school and gone through their vocation programming and prepared myself for an entry into the business a lot sooner than I did going to a liberal arts college and wasting 5 years of time. At the end, Grandview was not very happy with me as a student.
In what way was the Tech not happy with you?
Oh, Tech was not unhappy with me.
Oh, they were not. Oh.
No.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
No, I never had a problem with Tech High School. But, I did not take college very seriously, which I regret. But by the same token, I wanted vocational training as opposed to a liberal arts education, although I don't regret some of the experiences I had at Grandview in terms of learning from individual people and developing mentor relationships, I think.
So when you say that Grandview wasn't happy with you, basically you didn't graduate from Grandview.
No, I dropped out.
Yeah. But they still... you still were able to achieve quite a bit of success in your field, and you've been asked back to be like a guest speaker, haven't you, by Grandview?
I think enough time passed between the end of my enrollment days there and the success experienced later in life. And I'm thankful for that. I'm glad to be able, for what I wasted there at Grandview, I feel like I've been able to give back. So I feel good about that.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't... Do you really think it was a waste? I mean, you learned.
No, I did learn. I made a lot of better relationships. I had a good time. I grew. I met people from other high schools. So, no, it wasn't a wasted... You're right. It wasn't a wasted experience, but...
I mean, I commiserate sometimes when I think about college. Sometimes I have a negative energy about it, and I think mostly it has to do with just this idea of it cost me money. But, when I think back of the friends that I made and the things that I actually was able to learn, the skills I was able to develop, it was an overwhelmingly positive experience. But I feel what you feel a lot of times about my same thing, and I have the same thought that going to a conservatory that was more focused just on performance instead of liberal arts would have been better for me, because it would have been shorter and cheaper, and it would have made me more competitive earlier as an actor auditioning and stuff. So I definitely commiserate. I felt the same things, but on the same token, I'm more independent. I'm more well-rounded. I'm able to produce things on my own.
Sure.
And think in a way that's outside of just being a performer. So on the one hand, I feel that, and on the other hand, I'm also trying to see both sides of the argument and see that, maybe it was good for me in a way. And really, if it wasn't just for, at least in my personal experience, if it wasn't for the price tag, I don't think I would have any negative feelings about it.
Yeah.
But, so how many stations have you worked at, would you say?
Well, I've almost lost count.
What was so we talked about that Christian station that you worked at in 1979.
From there, I went on to doing some time on KDPS FM. And I felt like I did radio right. I'd learned enough about radio to do a kind of a memorable radio show on KDPS FM. At one point, I was...
what town was this in?
Well, it was on a weeknight. We all took turns on weeknights between 7 and 9 p.m. And was on the Grandview campus.
Okay.
At the time, this would have been, 81, 82, 80. That time frame, 1980 or so. But anyway, we all brought in our own music to play. We had 2 turntables, a audio board, and 1 tape cartridge machine. And so that was one of the first places I ever developed a fan base.
So you brought in your own records?
I brought in my own records to play. And I would...
Do you remember what kind of music you liked to play?
Oh, music from around the early 1980s.
Were these like 45s or were these...
No, I'd buy albums.
Buy LPs?
Yeah, and I'd just select some and put them in a satchel. At one time I was... in the summer of 81, I had stacked up some speeding tickets and got my license suspended, so I had to ride the bus a lot. So I remember getting aboard the bus and riding it to Grandview to do the radio show, and I had a satchel of records with me. And anyway, I had fun. In particular, a friend of mine did an air check of a show, and he was a fan. And I did a show in which I did a kind of a children's comic book episode in the middle, in which there was like an episode of Superman and Spider-Man that I bought at a department store, and they were on 45 RPMs, and one part of the episode was on one side, and the other part of the episode was on the other side.
So you take a commercial break.
So I would promo it. We're going to have the adventures of Superman and Spider-Man.
That's awesome.
So I play the first half of the episode, and then we had one tape cartridge machine, and I play a public service announcement that I recorded as a break while I queued up the other side of the record, and then I play the other side of the record. And I found people like that.
Yeah, it's fun. It breaks it up.
Somewhere I've got an air check recording of it. I'm not sure where, but
this was like a little radio play.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a lot of fun, and from there I went to a country music radio station called KSO, and my first night on the air was, for a while, kind of a scary experience in that they hired me the same day and they said, "Can you come in at midnight and work?" So I did. And the way it worked was all the music was on tape cartridge. And it was on an all-night shift basis, which meant midnight to 6. So it really wasn't that difficult. You just kind of went through the motions. And as a matter of fact, the biggest challenge was just trying to stay awake, in particular the last 2 hours between 4 and 6. And so from there, I got hired almost by accident as a newsman because they couldn't find anybody that wanted to come to Des Moines and work for that amount of money. And so I was, that was my first news job, the afternoon man there.
What station was this again?
KSO in Des Moines. It was at 1460 AM. It was a country station that had a very, very loyal audience and good ratings at the time until they started to fall off and AM radio started to slide. And so it was a lot of fun. Good professional people to work with, entertaining, eccentric characters. And so it was a lot of fun. From there, I ended up at a place called KBIZ in Ottumwa. And it had a sister FM station that was automated on reels. And when I was at KBIZ, I was a morning disc jockey. I did production, and then I sort of tended to the FM station as well while I was on duty. I basically worked from 3:30 to noon, 3:30 in the morning to noon, sometimes till 1 o'clock. And from there, I went to KCFI in Cedar Falls, where I was news director. And then from there, KQKD in Redfield, South Dakota, where I was really a jack of all trades and had a lot of fun because I did the music. I was the show host for the better part of the day between 5:30 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And I had the whole process down to a science. And it was a unique situation in that the station was out in the country and it had kind of a semi-flexible music forecast in which you could mix contemporary music with country music. And that's where I kind of learned and taught myself that it had to be done a certain way, in that you could not play 2 or 3 country songs in a row because it will become unappealing to a mass audience. And so we had a good variety of programming. I also did commercial production, and I did some sports there as well. And did a Coach's Corner show on Saturday morning, and learned a lot, grew a lot while I was there.
What was your, you say you were a jack of all trades, but what aspect do you think that you grew into that was your favorite?
Well, just growing and developing a radio personality, and also producing commercials on kind of a rapid yet qualitative basis.
Been able to quickly and efficiently produce a spot.
Yeah, exactly.
So would you say you preferred doing, was that more fun than doing sports, would you say?
Oh, yeah. It was well-rounded. It definitely was a well-rounded experience.
And so when you were up in Redfield, that was when Ben was born?
No, Benjamin was born when I was in Des Moines. And Benjamin accompanied us to Tumbo for a while. And then when I moved up to Redfield, I wasn't certain about the longevity of the job. And Evelyn and Ben lived with the Kazires in Mobile for a while, and then eventually moved up there. And then from Redfield, I got a job offer with WHO in Des Moines. And that's when I moved back to Des Moines for the first time since working for KSO.
And that was for who again? Was it before WHO? This was...
KQKD.
KQKD.
At AM 1380 in Redfield, South Dakota. Redfield, South Dakota is in Spink County. It's 40 miles south of Aberdeen. It's between Huron and Aberdeen. Those are the two nearby largest cities to Redfield. Redfield was about, I'd say 4,000 people and change. And it was fairly good sized for a community in South Dakota. South Dakota was a kind of an eye-opening experience for somebody because they don't have a lot of trees there. They have howling windstorms, and there's a greater distance between communities in terms of mileage.
Yeah.
And so...
I heard horror stories about the wind growing up.
Yeah, the wind howls and blows tumbleweeds across the road. Yet, it has a charm. South Dakota definitely has a charm. The people were wonderful. The people were just wonderful. And Redfield had 3 small-town grocery stores there. They had a Jack and Jill's, they had a Super Value, and one other place. And there was one place there, the Jack and Jill's store, where you could pull into a garage and park to go in the store.
Oh.
And they had a little chicken stand, in which they got to know me pretty good. And I'd buy chicken. You could get a dozen pieces of chicken for less than $5, and I'd buy chicken. And they'd make sure to give me as many chicken legs as possible.
Yeah.
And you know how people like chicken legs. So I remember that experience pretty fondly.
How long were you in Redfield?
8-9 months. We moved out in the wintertime and moved back to Des Moines. And moved out in a snowstorm, as a matter of fact.
So did you go from Redfield
I went from there to WHO in Des Moines. Right, where I spent 10 plus years.
Yeah, that was the first one I remember. So that was after that was when I was born. Benjamin's my brother, for anybody.
You were conceived in South Dakota and born in Des Moines.
I'll have to remember that the next time I'm in South Dakota. Really all began right here.
Yeah, that's the story.
So you were WHO for a good long while. So was that sort of...
It was the penultimate experience in terms of growth and evolution. and stature.
So what was really your title at WHO? I mean,
I was just more or less a general assignment reporter.
Yeah.
I took on the duties of, I'd fill in for sports, I'd fill in for the traffic reporter, and do whatever needed to be done.
Yeah, because you were this jack of all trades, the skills you developed, you were able to kind of be a floater for the company.
I was pretty versatile.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that's kind of what I found was my similar strength when I was working at ITAC and at the theater, is I could act if they needed me to, I could stage manage, I could run sound, I could hang lights, I could run the light board, I could...
It sure helps.
You know, it's... when you're and it's helped me now as I've tried to be more independent. You know, it's I mean, it's a trade-off, right? I'm not as competitive in any of the, like, I'm not a great designer, but I'm a handy person to have around because I fit into basically any team that they're trying to put together.
Exactly.
Even with my music, you know, I've been able to learn how to play drums and bass and guitar and sing, and learning more about production. And again, someone once said to me, it's another arrow in the quiver, is what they called it.
Absolutely.
You know. So what's your favorite memory from working at WHO?
I have a lot.
Well, we got time. We got nothing but time.
Yeah, I realize that. Every day was a different adventure. A lot of neat assignments, interview opportunities, short-term travel. It's where my first public address announcing opportunities opened up with the Des Moines Menace soccer team, the Iowa Cubs, the Iowa Barnstormers, the Des Moines Dragons, the Drake Bulldog women, and then the men. Really, my public address announcing experiences began in high school when I was at Lincoln, but they evolved into an experience that was kind of beyond my wildest dreams as far as opportunities are concerned, especially on a local basis in my own backyard.
Yeah, I as a kid, I don't think I appreciated it enough because you didn't really understand. You know, as a child, a lot of times you have no context for your life, and you take things for granted, I think, sometimes. And, I mean, on the one hand, I was never that into sports, so I don't think I appreciated getting taken along sometimes to these events. But when I think back on it, especially the Des Moines Menace, I think was my favorite team to get taken along to in the early days before Come and Go bought it. When they were when they would let me, a child, run the scoreboard. Granted, in a soccer game, the responsibilities of running a scoreboard are pretty reasonable because the goals are few and far between. But it was fun to be involved. It was fun to get to be up in the press box. And I remember when Ben would run the sound, he would play music for the Des Moines Menace, you would announce, and I would get to do the scoreboard. And was it the team manager at the time? Was his name Dave?
Yeah, Dave. I don't remember his last name. But
he was
a great guy.
He was nice to us. I mean, they paid me in Powerade and hamburgers, and I was happy. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that was the most informal of the experiences.
And eventually, the team gained more success, and they got sold to larger companies, and you know they got an adult.
They kind of got too big for the britches.
Yeah. But that was a fun and unique thing, looking back, that I didn't appreciate very well at the time, getting to be able to go to all those sporting events. And it was a skill that you were able to carry through you for the rest of your career as a nice side. I mean, even as when you did the Roosevelt games, when, at Roosevelt High School, and when in Algona, when you moved down from, you're just doing the public address announcing for sporting events in Algona for the high school. I mean, that was fun. That was. I remember even when you were able to announce for the Grand March my senior year of high school. That was really fun.
Again, it helps to be versatile in terms of what you can do. So a lot of fond memories of that in terms of a variety of experiences over the years.
So you talked about some of the fun characters that you got to meet at these stations. Is there anybody in particular you'd care to mention or reminisce about? Or?
Oh, yeah, gosh, a lot of people.
Here, let's just take a break. And we're back. Okay. So we were going to talk about maybe some of the fun characters that you have met over the years in your career. Any friends or maybe that you want to reminisce about or mention?
I'd like to mention a gentleman named Lou Thez, who was a 6-time world heavyweight champion wrestler who died at the age of 86 and is a member of several Wrestling Hall of Fames. Lou, in the last year of his life, devoted some time to me, and I think I was kind of reciprocating as well, as he wanted somebody to be with. This was at a function at Newton, and Lou reminisced with me, and he asked me about myself and my life, and gave of his time. And to me, he was a super celebrity. He was just an icon in his world. He wrestled the last match of his career when he was 76 years old.
Wow.
And he was in his 80s by then. And unbeknownst to me, he was in the last year of his life and gave a lot of his time to me. We shared cups of coffee, and I had to do a soccer game, and I really regretted having to leave Newton. But that's one of my favorite memories as far as time spent or interviews in the business is a guy named Lou Thez. And I don't know that a lot of people will recognize the name. But also, a lot of celebrity interviews over the years. I was talking the other day with a person named Andy Williams about interviewing Andy Williams, who was a singer during the flood of 1993. I interviewed Thomas Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House. And I had to, because he was old and frail, I got down, I just kind of sat on the floor and held the microphone up to within range of him. Former President Gerald Ford, I went to a press conference he was at. I covered an appearance by Bill Clinton when he was president at the Des Moines Airport. I covered my first caucus ever when I was going to Grandview back in 1980, and I've been following the Iowa caucuses ever since, for that matter. But the job basically entails a lot of celebrity opportunities along the way. Des Moines had a road race called the Rouen Greater Des Moines Grand Prix for 3 or 4 years before it went belly up. And 1 year I did the pit reporting and felt like I did a good job. Got to know the drivers, interviewed a lot of the drivers. so I knew him fairly well. I was in on the ground floor of the development of the Iowa Barnstormers indoor Arena Football League franchise. And I was there for their expansion draft. I was there for their very first game against the Miami Hooters in 1995. And I was there for Arena Bowl 10 at the end of the Barnstormers' second season in 1996.
Was this while Kurt Warner was there?
Yeah. He left not long afterwards, but in his second year, he led the team to the league championship game. And it was on regular ESPN on a Monday night. And competitive ball game in which we lost to Tampa Bay 42-38. And doing the PA for the Barnstormers was about as close as, and it was actually better than being able to manipulate a rock and roll frenzied crowd as you're ever going to get. And so I felt like it was even though we lost, it was a very powerful experience. And the early days of the franchise playing at Vets Auditorium were like no other, just based on the location to which the team was playing and the freedom and leeway that the crowd received. They came back years later with a kind of a generic version of the Barnstormers, but fans were required to sit in a certain location. They weren't allowed to get drunk, rip-roaring drunk.
Yeah.
And they were required to behave themselves.
Yeah, I have a vivid...
And back then, the Barnstormer fans would get rip-roaring drunk, and they would influence the outcome of games. And there was nothing quite like it.
I have a vivid memory of, because I remember some game that somebody thought it would be a great marketing idea to put these yellow flyers on all the seats. And so people started making airplanes and throwing the flyers onto the field when they would get upset. Oh, yeah. They were a rowdy bunch.
Yeah, you'll never, that kind of fun can never be repeated, frankly.
I mean, even the fact that they were yellow was just so short-sighted, and that the people started mistaking these, heckling flyer tosses as like a penalty flag. Is there, you've done so many different types of sports and stuff. I mean, you mentioned how Lou was a wrestler, and I know one of your great loves, at least when I was in high school, was getting to help ring announce for the local
Impact Pro Wrestling.
Yeah,
I announced many a card for them, and always had a great time in doing so.
How old were you when you saw your first wrestling card, like pro wrestling?
My dad took me to a card back in the early 1970s. We used to watch a weekly wrestling program on TV and make a lot of fun of it. So they would run what you call house shows at Vets Auditorium, and Dad took me to one, and we bought Arena Circle seating not far from ringside on the main floor, and that's where I saw my first wrestling card.
Did you always know that it was choreographed? And
absolutely.
But you're still drawn to the storytelling of it, or just the physicality of it, or?
Well, a combination of things, frankly.
Yeah. The costumery, the music.
I was very fortunate later to be able to meet some of these people and discover that they're regular human beings. And I am
the sacrifice and the dedication that it takes
I'm really gratified with the experience and having had the chance to do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to become a pro wrestler. That's
it's a rough and tumble experience. If you can imagine what it must have been like to try and break into the business and survive in the 60s and 70s as an independent contractor, receiving straight up cash for your remuneration, if you will.
Yeah, if you're getting paid, you know,
that sort of thing.
If you're not getting ripped off by some sleaze.
And then you have to avoid getting hurt.
Yeah.
And then you have to
be in peak physical condition.
And then you have to drive to your next location. It's definitely rough and tumble, and I would say the majority of what you're trying to do is avoid getting beat up or hurt.
Yeah. Well, that's part of working with somebody that you like and trust. I mean, that's what I found in any collaborative art form is you have to be able to, I assume you got to be in the ring with somebody that you enjoy working with.
Yeah. In many capacities of life.
You went on some trips with the wrestlers, right? Was there, how many?
Yeah, I enjoyed going to small Iowa towns.
Did you ever do an overnight trip? Or was it always just kind of to the car?
No, it was always drive there, drive back type experience. But I went to many small Iowa towns and enjoyed it each and every time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like fun. I know that, what was it, Johnny Thunder was...
A guy named Dave Arrowwood of Algona, Iowa, who works for Snap-on Tools, played a very memorable character. He was beginning to age and phase out of the business when I came along. But of all the independent wrestlers, or the small market or independent wrestlers I've ever seen, he was very good in terms of his skill and having the look of a big-time wrestler. And also in his ability to work and call a match. He took a young man named James Jeffries, who is still wrestling for IPW and is very popular, from Riceville, Iowa. We were in a little facility in Algona called the Vault that was used as a training facility and a place to hold wrestling shows. And Dave carried James through a match in which the outcome was you had to be smashed through a portable collapsible table.
Oh.
And Dave was getting up there in his age, yet very skillfully carried James through a table match in which James was the winner. And I remember seeing Dave afterwards, and he had a lot of aches and pains.
Mm-hmm.
But great skill. A lot of respect for somebody like that. That is an art. That is a skill and an art. And, Dave's a very admirable person. A guy named Travis Shillington of Algona, Iowa, also was a very good person in terms of training, being a on-the-road companion, a great wrestler in his own right, and just a great father. He's another employee of Snap-on Tools, which is a penultimate employer in the Algona area that pays their employees well. And so got in Travis Shillington and Troy Peterson, very instrumental in getting IPW off the ground and keeping it off the ground.
They're still operating to this day, aren't they?
Yeah.
I did not know
They're
that.
running shows in Des Moines on a regular basis. But when my time ran out in Algona, I figured it was time to retire.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of fun. Learned a lot.
What would you? What was there a sport that you preferred, or that you have if you were gonna do one last PA gig, who would it be for?
Basketball.
Basketball.
Yeah.
The Dragons specifically, or I mean, there was the Heat too, and then there was those the only two basketball teams you did?
I did. Des Moines,
Drake.
Lincoln.
And there was Drake too.
Drake University. The Des Moines Dragons. The Des Moines Heat. I did a University of Iowa men's exhibition game.
Is it the pacing of basketball? Is that why you enjoy it the most, or is it the
Most definitely. There's no real lulls in play, and it's fun to it was the first sport. High school baseball is the first one I ever did, but the second one was high school basketball, and I've always enjoyed the pacing of the sport and keeping on top of things.
Yeah, I remember doing when I was in high school. You were working at KLGA in Algona, which came out because you left WHO to work for the Jock in Des Moines, and then from the Jock you went to Algona. And in high school, I got a part-time job working as a board op on the weekends, but in the summertime, sometimes I would do sporting events. And one of my fondest memories is getting to do where you were doing play-by-play for, I think it was Sartell, and I was back at the station, running the board, playing the commercials. We were at baseball. That's a tough one for radio. You gotta really be creative, and I remember a few times where there was like my attention had drifted, and there was a lull in the action, and I was panicking because I was like, oh God, did he go to a spot and I missed it?
Yeah, that's pretty easy.
But basketball. I did it was in high school too that I got more into watching basketball with you, because we got into watching the NBA more, and I remember characters. I liked the Celtics. I remember getting into the Celtics when they had Paul Pierce and Antoine. I forget his name, Antoine something, but they were a good 3-point shooting team. This was like in 2003 or something like that. But yeah, I would have to say too, as an observer, as a spectator, I've gotten more into watching football as I've gotten older, because my Ailey really likes it. My wife really likes watching football, but basketball for me too. It was flashy. I remember there's a line from the movie Space Jam where they call it a quick-paced razzle-dazzle sort of game, and I concur.
I find that sporting events live are more engaging and
especially hockey,
enrapturing than watching on television.
Especially hockey, where you can smell the ice and you can hear the skates cut through the ice, and the slamming of the boards and the smack of the puck. There's so much.
Yeah, hockey is really the best served live, that's for sure.
It's a real sensory experience.
Yeah, it is. I remember the first time I ever went to a professional hockey game when I was a young lad, and I was just absolutely enamored. I had to beg my older brother to take me. And I went to see a team called the Des Moines Capitals play. And we bought seats down on the ice called goalie helper seats. And they were located like catty-corner to the goalie in the goal mouth on the north side of the ice. And, hockey is definitely a great sensory experience, especially I found at the professional level, when players are older and have been around and know what they're doing.
Yeah. Do you think, how important to the recipe do you think having an organ player is for a great hockey game?
Oh, it's vital.
Maybe, if you had your choice between we're gonna play rock songs off of the CD or the iPod.
No, I would play, for both minor league baseball and hockey, you need an organ.
You need an organist. I think all too forgotten in today's modern age of producing hockey events. I mean, the churches will still employ an organ player, but I feel like there's a lost market there, organ players. Get on it.
Absolutely.
Here's another question that's been on my mind, and this is changing topics a little bit, but and if you don't want to answer it in this medium, that's okay. But it's I get a lot of questions when I'm at work lately, especially the older I get, where people are like, "When are you gonna have kids?" And I wasn't really planning on it. And someone said to me at work one day, like, "Oh, your poor mother." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "All these ladies here, you'd ask them, the greatest thing in their life is being a grandma." And I was like, "Oh, man." And I had a conversation with Mom about, like, what if you were never a grandma? Is that something that's going to be, like, are you really upset about that? Is that something you feel like is going to be missing in your life? And Mom, being the wonderful mother she is, she was like, "No, of course not. Like, I just want you to be happy and make the choice that's right for you," because she's Mom and she's lovely. But how do you honestly feel about the idea of, I mean, you have Pete, who's kind of a grandpuppy.
I would concur with the way that Evelyn feels, because it's your life and you need to be happy, and you don't necessarily need to be weighted down. These are your decisions to make, and you have to take into consideration that your professional and creative growth, learning, and development are of penultimate importance to you. You are an artist. You are a performer. You are an artist. You are a performer, and that is the pathway that you need to follow for as long as you can in life. And so, no, I'm the same way. It's not going to be a detriment to not ever be a grandpa.
Okay.
I've seen plenty of grandpas in my lifetime. But I mean, think
you have
one of the more satisfying things about watching you grow and develop over the years is just that artistic pursuit. And I don't think people take that notion seriously, no matter what they're doing with their lives. Is everybody is an artist, everybody is a performer, and you have to follow that trail. You have to fulfill yourself in that regard for as long as you live, as long as you have the strength, as long as you feel like you have the ability. And having watched you grow up and take on some of the traits that I did over the years of being able to play independently with your own imagination, to be able to write, to think, to sing, all these things that go into being an artist and a performer are very self-satisfying.
It brings me a lot of joy. I definitely, I find myself the happiest in its pursuit.
Absolutely. It's not necessarily chasing something down and capturing it. It's definitely the pursuit.
The pursuit of.
The pursuit of pursuit.
Yeah, because there's always, I don't know, it's something that's constantly emerging and something that, nothing's ever perfect and it's okay. But it's fun to kind of challenge yourself and, see what else you can do. Even something like this, which is, we live in this wonderful modern age. Sometimes I fret about my equipment and my gear, and that I need different tools or better tools. But when I think about, well, hold on a second now, and I look at everything that I do have, and it is just such a miraculous. This is the age that we live in, that I was able to, with pretty insufficient means, be able to cobble together the tools to create what I can create. And I think about people 100 years ago who maybe would have loved to have a conversation and be able to hold on to that conversation for decades, and they weren't able to, and I can. And I sometimes you just got to count your blessings and be grateful with what you have and just make some stuff. And so I don't know, that's a philosophy that I carry with me and the stuff that I do, and I'm grateful to be able to spend this time with you.
I mentioned earlier getting my first ever cassette recorder. I remember taking some cards that came in packages of regular Topps football cards when I was about 11 or 12 and assembling a football game. And so I remember turning on my cassette player, and I had a football game between the New England Patriots and the Buffalo Bills. And the Bills had O.J. Simpson as a running back at the time. And the Patriots had a guy named Jim Plunkett at quarterback. And I just imagined a game between the two and did the play-by-play. Later on, I had my dad drop me off at Taylor Stadium one night, and I bought a ticket, and I sat in the left field grandstands. I bought a program and kept score of a game between the New Orleans Pelicans and the Iowa Cubs, and there wasn't anybody around to hassle me because it was in April, and they didn't draw that well in April. And a guy hit the game-winning home run in the bottom of the ninth inning for Iowa, a guy named Tommy Spencer. This was along about 1976. And I recorded it on a cassette that I purchased from Radio Shack that was 60 minutes a side at the time. And that was kind of weak tape. And so the recording I made eventually broke. It was kind of heartbreaking at the time.
Yeah.
But I also created a kind of a wrestling dice game using two-sided dice. And I'd roll the dice on the floor to determine the outcome of an individual wrestling move. And I did a match between myself and a wrestler who was a multiple-time world champion, and I lost because I didn't feel like I had any business winning the match. But what I did was my parents had a lamp out in the living room that was metal, and I used it at the beginning of the match, and I did a clang, clang, turned the tape off, and then introduced myself and my opponent. Actually, I did a bell to start the match. And anyway, I rolled the dice on the floor of my bedroom to determine the kind of play-by-play outcome of this match. And then when the referee did any kind of count, I would slap the floor. 1, 2, and he kicks out. Kind of thing.
I mean, that sounds so fun. It makes me think of, now it's pretty popular for people to play like Dungeons and Dragons or do like a role-playing game, and they'll tape it, and they'll, because they develop these characters, and then they roll the dice and they see how the situations go and they act it out. It kind of reminds me of that. I mean, it's fun when you're a human being to just sort of, like you said, play with your imagination.
I had a lot of time to play on my own as a kid, and that's how I kind of counterbalanced the isolationism is I just would play games like that. And awful lot of fun. When the Nerf Corporation first came along with an item called a Nerf hoop, that was a little metal basket that you fit on the upper part of your door sill. It came with a net, a rim, and a sponge basketball. That was a lot of fun. And then Nerf came out with a football, and we had a yard that had a lot of embankment to it, a neighborhood that had a lot of embanked homes. Anyway, I had a couple small trees that were growing that were spaced far enough apart to act as like a goal post up on we had like a 2-tier embankment to the backyard. And so I used to put the first Nerf football I ever got was purple, and it was sponge in its composition, and so it wouldn't damage things indoors like a regular football would. And so I started out. I'd play a football game in the backyard, in which I'd move up and down the backyard. I'd move from north to south, and I would have running plays and passing plays. And then when I ran into a fourth down situation and I felt like the ball was in range, I'd attempt a field goal, and I'd kick it up at this set of 2 trees. And if it went through the middle of the trees, it was good. And then the neighbors had a swing set up on the embanked portion of their backyard, and there was a fence separating the 2 yards, and I would kick the ball up and try to cross the top of the swing set for my goal post.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then my dad built me a treehouse in the backyard when I was growing up. And when it was first built, I used it a lot as a lunar module, because it was the era of Apollo moon landings. And it had a ladder that descended to the ground. And so I used it on a pretend basis quite a bit as a lunar module. And then Dad put up a backboard on the side of the treehouse, and I used it to practice basketball a lot. And then they put one on the house itself, which was just really noisy, and I just got to the point where I hated to irritate my parents any further, and plus I didn't make my high school basketball team. There were just too many players out, and I sort of stopped playing on a regular basis. But I had an imagination-filled childhood experience, much like you did.
Yeah, I remember similarly I made up a game in the backyard with the football. So, like, I took the idea that there was, like, 4 downs, and so I would start on one end of the backyard, and I'd toss football in the air, and I'd try and, run and catch it, and I had to get to the other end of the backyard in 4 downs. So, yeah, I had to... That was the goal I set for myself, was to be able to make it in 4 throws. And eventually that got too easy as I got bigger and older.
Yeah. That's the way it becomes.
But yeah, I mean, I loved playing with my action figures. I loved... I never said it to myself as like, hey, I'm making up stories. I never called it improvisation. I just was playing with my action figures. That's what it was in my head. And thinking back, especially with as I befriended Forrest in first grade and we became really good friends, we would play pretend. And basically, yeah, it was making up stories. And but I never really viewed it that way. I just kind of viewed it as play. And Really, it's no wonder that I am who I am when I think back on what my childhood was or what I've always loved to do. And sometimes I wish I was still as good at it. Like, I think I was much better at it as a child, making up stories and just having fun. But
yeah, that's very truthful.
Like, I did it at will, without even thinking about it. And sometimes, you'll have writer's block, and you won't. Nowadays, that's the great adage as an improviser, is to just say yes to the idea, whatever pops in your head, develop it and go with it and have fun with it and roll with it. And I think it's easier and easier to say no as I get older. But I try to live my life that way, with that kind of say yes attitude. And when I think about the wonderful opportunities I've had and everywhere that art and performing has taken me, I'm really glad I said yes, because I've seen a great expanse of life. I've had the opportunity to travel to Rome with the school choir in college and singing cathedrals in Rome. And on the other end of the spectrum, I think that with the Dirty Reggae Punks, there was a night where in New Orleans after the hurricane, we stopped. We met a friend who helped us book some shows, and she took us to this house where some kids were just squatting in an abandoned house in New Orleans post the hurricane, and basically just living this hobo lifestyle that they wanted to live. And there were no lights on in this place, and we played a show for them in like the dark. And I just think about the far extremes.
The contrast
of my adventure, and I'm grateful, and it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm sometimes in awe of the variance and the diversity of this thing that we call life.
Oh, absolutely.
I know that when you were young, your parents used to take you traveling a lot, and that you had kind of an adverse.
Sorry, I'm moving my chair.
That's okay. I can cut this out. We'll fix it in post.
That's okay. Just trying to stay comfortable.
Yeah, well, they told you to. I think it's good that you're sitting up and laying back down. I think that that goes along with what the PT person was telling you. But is there a place for you that you remember as your greatest adventure, or that? If you could travel anywhere that you've been so far again, one last time, where do you think you'd go?
Oh, well, there's so many things that are difficult to recreate.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the same, but, there's places that we live, but I wonder if there's, as the traveler...
traveling in the 60s, for me, was an adventure in that there was... a degree of uncertainty, and there was a degree of wonderment. I remember my parents took me on a vacation out east to Virginia and then Washington, D.C. And I remember the first day that we ended up in Indiana, at a rural location in Indiana, at a small motel. And I think it was probably 7. Anyway, the little things for me, such as being in an area where there were new TV stations I'd never watched or seen before. And back then we only had a few TV stations. There was not far from the motel, there was some road construction going on. And there was a construction device called an earth mover. And I went outside after supper, and I climbed up on the earth mover and played.
Yeah.
And then supper itself was quite an interesting experience, in that this motel had a small little restaurant, and I couldn't find anything on the menu that was worth a darn in terms of...
You're talking about the menu, the food?
Yeah, anyway, the motel had a small restaurant with a menu, And I couldn't find anything on the menu that seemed appealing to me as a 7-year-old. So I ordered what was called tuna fish plate. And when tuna fish plate arrived at the table, it consisted of an open can of tuna. Just plain tuna in a can that was opened. And it wasn't very appealing. And I remember my mom going, well, why don't you eat it? Because she was tired and grumpy from a day's travel on Interstate 80. So I thought, I don't think I ate a morsel of that tuna fish plate. But anyway, the next morning, I remember waking up going, what are we going to do for breakfast? Where are we going to go to? Where are we going to go to eat? And I guess I was a little bit more sensitive to uncertainty back then. And so we ended up getting dressed, getting on the interstate and heading eastward. And Dad stopped at the International House of Pancakes.
Oh.
And back then, to me, there's a little bit of a difference between then and now. I remember the International House of Pancakes had several flavors of syrup, and there was a simplicity involved with just ordering buttermilk pancakes at the time and a glass of milk.
Like they didn't have eggs and bacon, they just had...
I never really was an egg person. I never really have liked eggs, for that matter.
Did they serve more than just pancakes, or did they just serve pancakes?
I just was enamored with the pancakes. I was a big pancake-only type of person at the time. And so that was my first ever experience with the International House of Pancakes. And so, if you want to give yourself a laugh, you can just think of how that's worded or how that's...
Yeah. Yeah, I've never... I don't think I saw any international houses of pancakes in a different country. I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly.
But the recipe, it might have been a German recipe or something like that.
Well, to me, it was before the era of cutting back on trans fat.
Oh, yeah.
When things really had a good taste to them. So
don't make them like they used to, huh, Dad?
Maybe it's just in one's imagination, but
no,
we stopped at other places like a Howard Johnson's, and then we made it to our destination by the end of the second day to Hampton, Virginia. That, is one of my favorite vacations of all time. That I remember that memory of tuna fish plate and the International House of Pancakes very, very well. As we got older, my parents sort of aged rapidly, and that was an adventuresome vacation for us. My brother was older. He graduated from high school and went to college for a while, then dropped out and was stationed in Vietnam, or actually in the service at the time. So I never really got to experience much in my childhood with John that I remember, which I regret for that matter. But the vacation to Virginia was a memorable experience. I had a vacation to Clear Lake that was also memorable with my mom and dad, my brother, and my Uncle Jack and his family, my dad's brother. And then I wanted to go back to Clear Lake again, but without Uncle Jack and his family, or John, it was difficult to recreate. I was there by myself with my mom and dad, and we had to leave early for the vacation because of a death in the family. So it's kind of tainted.
Yeah.
But those are two favorite adventure experiences as a young man.
Going to Clear Lake and getting to eat at the International House of Pancakes. Yeah. I mean, those are some good memories.
It's the simple things that you remember.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I could come up with just one memory. Like you said, it's kind of tough to narrow it down. I've had a great many adventures. I mean, I've told the story in another podcast about our show about the Dirty Reggae Punks when we played in Atlanta. That was probably my favorite memory of performing. But also getting to venture to Colorado for the first time and swimming in the ocean for the first time, I think, were two, really, because I mean, we grew up on the plains. I was so used to that geography and topology that, I've never been to the desert. And, Ben went off to the desert and never came back, so maybe there's something to the desert that I gotta check out. But really, there's a thrill for me as a plains dweller to be able to go up a mountain is a thrill for me. And, I've had such polarizing experiences with the ocean. My first experience in swimming in the ocean was in Long Island, and it was cold. And there was I could see on the horizon this giant cargo ship with all the big cargo boxes on it. And for some reason, that perspective really freaked me out. Like, I was, it was cold, so it was uncomfortable. But also I felt an overwhelming fear in the vastness of the ocean.
Yeah, I did too. My only experience was swimming in the Atlantic, and I don't know, I'm pretty squeamish around fish. So the imagination sort of runs wild.
Yeah. On the other hand, when I went with Ailey to Puerto Rico to visit her family, we did have a chance to go to a local beach, and this was I forget the name of the beach. It was on the south side of the island, and there wasn't a lot of tourists there. You could tell that the people that were there were people that lived on the island, and the water was warm. It was very calm, and I had quite the opposite experience. It was very peaceful. I found myself kind of almost meditating a little bit in the waters, feeling the waves wash over me and kind of feeling a connectedness to the world. So, like I said, completely polarizing experiences of one of fear and being overwhelmed, and one of being at peace and feeling connection. So I don't know. Maybe it is just the how far north you are or something. Not all ocean is equal, maybe, but I don't know. The ocean is a fascinating and wonderful part of the planet, really. Holds a lot of mystery, holds a lot of diversity of life. And there probably is something primal about, we're land dwellers now as a species, but I'm sure that genetically there's something primal about sort of...
We probably came out of the water.
Yeah. But also the mountains too. There's something beautiful about a mountain. I've been watching Bob Ross on Netflix lately. They have Bob Ross on there, so I get to kind of relive those memories of as a kid watching him on Saturday afternoons on PBS. And he always has a mountain. More often than not, when he's painting a landscape, he throws a mountain in there because they are gorgeous. I do.
They are beautiful. I find that on YouTube in particular, any kind of footage of train travel through the mountains is just so gorgeous and so pristine that it's just a marvel. Whether it's the Rockies or the Cascades or the Sierra Mountains, it's just a sight to behold, that's for sure.
Yeah. Maybe because it's just so contrary to what we're used to living in Iowa.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that probably all the mountain dwellers out there.
Well, actually, the last time I was unemployed, I kind of let my imagination run away with me a little bit, thinking, I want to move to Montana. I want to work in Montana before I kick the bucket. And so I sent a few letters of inquiry to radio stations in Montana. And then I latched on to a newspaper publication called the Flathead Valley Beacon. And they have a police blotter, which is a regular summary of police activity in the area. And it's another thing where your imagination can run wild, but the facts are the facts by the same token. Mm-hmm. And people behave so crazily that I decided, well, maybe I don't want to move to Montana.
So Montana was not for you.
Well, I don't know.
I guess we never really gave it a shot.
I mean, I've seen the pictures, seen the footage. The beauty of YouTube is there are people that will book train rides on Amtrak and sit there with the video on their phones and just record the footage as it goes by. There's this guy that booked a trip in Chicago, and he went on the Empire Builder from Chicago to Seattle on the day after Christmas. So the Empire Builder doesn't leave. So he lived in suburban Chicago. So as this tape begins, and it's about 4 hours long, and you can't possibly. I mean, the average attention span is able to make it through like an hour on YouTube before becoming disinterested, or restless or something. Anyway, this guy starts out in suburban Chicago on the L going south. Then he gets on the Empire Builder and goes north. And this guy inundates you with every detail because here he is on this trip. He's got a video phone and is recording footage out the window. Then he's got an atlas, he's got a GPS device, and he's got a train scanner. So he's on top of everything.
Yeah. So
the train, it's December 26th. The train doesn't leave Chicago till like 2:15 or thereabouts. So by the time they get up to Milwaukee, it's dark. And he showed some footage on the way up through Illinois into Wisconsin. And as a matter of fact, there's where I work. Here's where the very first mall was ever built in suburban Chicago, and it's since been torn down. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, the next morning, it's again late December, and it's 20 below zero outside, and the heating on this train goes on the fritz. So he said that he spent the night in his roomette, kind of heavily dressed.
Oh, I bet.
And so it takes a while the next morning for the heat to climb back up. And then the only thing you have to look at that second day of the trip is rural areas of North Dakota and eastern Montana, which are flat and snow-covered. And so they had to stop a couple of different times because of cold weather factors. So they eventually they wheel into Spokane, Washington, and kind of switch the configuration of the train around. Then the next morning you wake up and he's going through the Cascades. And then all of a sudden you descend out of the Cascades and you're in suburban Seattle, and there's no snow at all.
Oh, wow.
So it's very interesting. I like train travel in as much as you can experience it in short increments with footage that people have shot. And he's one of the better efforts. Other people don't do it properly. There was a person who took a train trip through southern Illinois into Chicago, and they did so in the exploration car portion of this train. And there are a bunch of women in there. And during the course of this trip, these women never shut up. In fact, in one of the comment sections of YouTube, that's what the person said. These women never shut up. But there's other people who, it's my regular train trip, blah, 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 blah. The best way to do it is just show the footage, give a minimum amount of information, and let the person enjoy the ride.
Yeah, let their imagination run wild.
So,
I fell in love with trains when I got to study abroad in London. And,
I can imagine that train travel over there.
Well, we took one trip. I remember my girlfriend at the time, Anna, her sister came over, and I forget the name of her husband. But we went to Belgium, and we were going to take the train into Belgium, and we were going to go through the channel. You know, you go through this tunnel under the English Channel, and I had, done no real research, but I had a misconception of that I'd be able to, I don't know, that the tunnel would be transparent or something, and so I'm nervous and all excited, and we get into it, and it's just dark. It's a solid tunnel. The train lights. You can't really see anything out the window, and next thing you know, I couldn't help it. But with the rhythmic, it was early in the morning, and with the rhythmic pulsing of the train, I fall asleep. But then, you wake up on the other side, and you're in France, and you're just shooting like a bullet.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. But it was like a 2-hour. See, this was, I think, the biggest cultural difference between Europe and the United States. Is in 2 hours, I am in a place where people are speaking a different language and there's a completely different culture. Whereas I drive 2 hours in Minnesota, I am still in Minnesota. That was one of the things we talked about, is how there's even just kind of in other parts of the world, especially Western Europe, there's a misconception of the size of the United States and how expansive it is and just how big it is. I remember Anna, who grew up on a farm, she wanted to go visit a farm in England, and she did. And I remember, the fields over there are so much smaller than your standard field in Iowa. And Anna was telling them, they were curious about how her family in Iowa heated their home, and she was telling them that they have a corn burning furnace. And they were just kind of taken aback, isn't that a waste of corn? And she was like, oh, you don't understand. There's so much corn. So I thought that was interesting to me, how over there there's, I don't know, just I think a different sense of how, the size of a nation and the diversity of geography, as opposed to over here we have there's a great diversity of culture in the United States. You can't help it with how large it is, but it is kind of a miracle how much we do share in common, and how much culture has been able to permeate over such a great expanse.
Oh, absolutely.
Even when you think about your career, your voice carried over miles.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It can be mind-boggling in that regard. I once talked during a snow and ice storm for hours on end with very few breaks, and I remember an English teacher sent me a note in the mail this was a WHO. An English teacher sent me a note in the mail and said, "Dear Mr. Shockley, I'd appreciate it if you could stop using so many ands and ahs when you speak."
Oh, they do hate that.
So
there's a guy, Rexford Sweetwater. He had me on his show in Alexandria. He has a show that he hosts Thursday nights, and it's called Yesternight. And he plays heavy metal music from the 1980s. But he received the same grief that you had been given about going too many times, and his personality was to kind of lean into it and do it more, in that punk rock attitude. But my friend Minnesota Max, who also goes on the show, he was saying, like, well, they have a point.
They do. They do.
But, somebody, even if it's criticism, it is kind of, I love, when I get criticism, I take, it's an opportunity to grow, but also I take some positivity in that somebody felt passionately about what you were doing enough to write you a letter.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember when I was at the religious station, a woman, an old woman, sent me 2 or 3 beautifully crocheted crucifixes.
Oh, wow. Crocheted, wow.
Yeah, they were crocheted, and they were crucifixes. And I know that I've always had a following with kind of an older demographic. Years ago, I ran into a person who was a high school teacher of mine who taught me history and sociology, and hadn't seen him in many years. And he told me of hearing my voice on the radio and just simply thinking to myself, I have a friend on the radio. And that was one of the most flattering comments I've ever received. And I've always prided myself on being genuine, especially when it comes to being able to reflecting to people over the radio. I want to be friendly and genuine and sound like it.
Yeah, speak from a place of honesty.
So that meant a great deal to me.
Yeah.
Mr. Dave Ortell, I don't think he's with us anymore, but he was a coach, a teacher of history and sociology at Lincoln High School. I remember the first night I was on the air at KSO in Des Moines, my Aunt Frankie discovered I was on the air, and she went into, she said she went into kind of a shock about it. But that first night on the air at KSO, I was just so nervous. Just wanted to get through that 6 hours between midnight and 6 because I hadn't slept beforehand. And I made it finally. And it was just kind of a beginning for me. And also they recorded a brief show opener for me that I remember to this day. Tom Collins of KSO, who was a part of a morning team called Tom and Jerry, recorded an opener with a drum roll and voiced it. Chuck Shockley beats them all by a country mile on KSO. I've got air checks of it somewhere on cassette or reel. I would hope that someone, after I go, would look into my collection and might be able to hear some of that.
Yeah.
But it's those little thrills like that that really make it all worthwhile.
I remember in high school, when I was doing competitive speech, winning some awards, and my teacher, Jessica, she was talking to someone who was like in charge of the Iowa High School Speech Association. I forget the gentleman's name. I want to say it was Craig or something, but I mean, he was a great speaker too, and he would come out at the beginning of the All-State Festival and give a little speech, and he was a great personality. But Jessica was working with him on some committee, and he'd kind of he said something about me, I think, or he'd kind of noticed the team was doing well, and he saw my name on some piece of paper, and he's like, Alex Shockley, and she's like, yeah, that's Chuck Shockley's son, and he knew you. He was like, Chuck Shockley's in Algona, you lucky. How did you guys get that lucky? And I remember her telling me this story, and feeling such pride and also kind of amazement that like, oh wow, like my dad really has touched people all over the state. And
I was at a football game in the Twin Cities, and my brother was there too. And I got recognized there. I don't know how or why. But the funny part of it was, I was John Shockley. That's John Shockley's brother. One other story. I was in Blue Earth, Minnesota one night, late one night. And we were on the way back from a wedding. Diana Shockley Embertson and Mitch Embertson's wedding in the summertime. And anyway, we're trying to make our way back to Algona on 169. I pulled off at a convenience store in Blue Earth, Minnesota. And I purchased a ice cream sandwich. And I was standing in the parking lot when a couple pulled up in their car, and they go, Chuck!
Did you know who
and it
they
turns
were?
out they recognized me from Algona or somewhere. And they were out bar hopping late at night, and they were going around to these small town bars. And they wanted me to take a look at the map and tell me if I knew of any nearby bars.
They're asking the wrong guy.
Yeah, I didn't really know, so I pointed out this little community. Well, why don't you drive over here to Wild, Minnesota and see if they got anything?
It sounds like a wild place, yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember you being annoyed by it a little bit, though. This might not be a real story.
Well, I had my days where I'd get irritated by it, and I feel deep pangs of regret for each of those instances where I tried to blow somebody off. And I find that the great egotistical lessons of life are derived through those unfortunate moments when everything goes to your head. And it's very regretful. I don't begrudge anybody who has been kind enough to listen to me or recognize me. I had a guy on the People Rides bus here the other day, a guy named Andy Williams, who recognized me, and some of the people around the care facility here in Marshalltown recognized me as well. And I don't, I'm beyond the age where I deserve to be recognized for that matter, but...
Well, I don't know. I think that because of your age, more people are going to recognize you. You've had more time to touch more lives.
So, yeah.
I think, well, it feels good to, that's something I've thought about a lot with my life and my choices of what to do. I think about what you were able to accomplish, what you were able to do with your life. It's a very small group of people I know who were able to have a dream and actualize it for pretty much their whole career. You wanted to do radio, you went after it, you learned how to do it, you were excellent at it, and you had, you never did anything else.
Yeah, well, even up until the latter part of it, I was able to do news and do a show on the Grinnell station, and the Grinnell station was an opportunity to grow and develop and nurture a personality while playing music. Yeah. And I'll forever be thankful for that opportunity. And then I got to do some play-by-play as well. And the games were on an FM station, Energy 106.7, and I did them by myself. I didn't have to lean on anybody else. I just did the description and threw in whatever increments and elements from my own style, and just thankful for it. And so you're right. I have, had a very fulfilling experience along the way.
Yeah, it's been an inspiration to me, and but it was, as much as, because there are times when I've felt selfish in the pursuit of my passion and my art, but you were able to provide service, like you said. You were a friend to people.
The good Lord has a way of humbling you when you get too full of yourself.
Yeah.
I really think it does. And so I wanted to add that part too, so go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, like you said, with that guy who was able to say, feel like he had a friend on the radio, you were able to provide entertainment and information and provide a service for people while fulfilling your passion. And, and I think I've done so many jobs for money, and I feel fortunate to have had the wisdom to be able to look at what I was doing and evaluate it on, two criteria that are more important than money, which I feel like I've learned from you, which is this actually benefiting anyone? Is this a job where there's, when I was working at Wells Fargo, I was able to kind of assess, A, I'm not happy, and B, I don't think this job is actually beneficial to anyone. And so I quit. And, there have been jobs that I've done that haven't necessarily been, like when I was working at Douglas Machine, anodizing aluminum, wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do, but I was still able to take solace in the other criteria of, like, is it helping people? And, being able to build a machine, or at least help contributing to make a part for a machine that was helping to feed people, I could, at least in the bigger picture, see that I was contributing positively to my community, and then I don't know, I just felt that was always important to find. Those are the two criteria, I think, that I try to live my life by. Am I providing a valued service that's making my life and everyone's life better, or and if it doesn't meet those criteria, it's probably not something that's worth doing.
No, absolutely not.
Well, what would you recommend to someone who, what would you, as someone who's been able to achieve a dream, what would you recommend to maybe a young person who doesn't know what they want to do with their life yet, but maybe has an inkling, maybe they, because maybe it's not even radio, maybe somebody just wants to draw, luckily you were able to find something that there was a market for, and that you could work for a corporation and achieve a certain amount of financial independence by pursuing radio. But even in those moments, there must have been stuff you had to do that you didn't want to do. What would you recommend to a young person about, like, how did you stay disciplined, or what if you could give a piece of advice as to, like, to all the dreamers out there, what would it be?
Boy, dream on. Yeah, advice. Well, it is important to dream. It's important to imagine. It's important to learn to play or engage in activities by yourself should you be in an isolated condition. It's also important to listen and learn from elderly relatives and elderly people, to pick their brains for their experiences, and then do the same with anybody who could offer a mentor-like relationship, be they young or younger than you or older than you. It's important to go to the public library and read, and it's important to, for my money, to listen to the radio, because I feel that your ears are your most important sense. Your ears, to a degree, are more important than your eyes, for that matter. And it's important to educate yourself as best you can, no matter what your degree of learning capacity. You need to learn to not be afraid to speak in public.
That's a tough one.
Which is a challenge.
When I was coaching the high school speech team in Alexandria, we made T-shirts, and the T-shirts were like top 5 fears in the world, and it's like, like spiders, death, but the number one fear is public speaking. People are afraid to speak in public.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's almost institutionalized in us. I think that we're told to shut up so that we don't cause problems.
Might very well be.
But I think you're very right. I think that people need to learn to empower themselves and believe in their voice. Even if you're wrong, let's say you say something that's not true, or you say something that people disagree with. If you don't say it, you don't open yourself to the opportunity to learn and grow. Maybe somebody disagrees.
People during the 19th century were much better orators, no matter what their level of education, than they are now. When you consider that they didn't have much to do other than talk to each other.
True. There was a lot less visual stimulus, and
I once read a book called Wicked River, which is a history of the Mississippi River. And there used to be people who would row rafts down the river, flatbed type of rafts. They would have braggart sessions late at night. Now, keep in mind that they drank and were boisterous about it. But they would have bragging competitions where they'd stand up and, I am this, that, I can do this and that, and this. And I just marvel at some of the written literature of the 1800s as well, as the country was growing and developing. Even, along about the era of Lincoln, the Civil War. And that's one of the things I've just always marveled at, is just the words, the large words of the time, and how they were used by speakers and writers. Getting back to the book about the Mississippi River, great book. I discovered it up in Algona and read the book like 3 times. Because when you're in towns of a certain size and they only have so many titles in the library, you go back and read stuff again.
Mm-hmm.
So at the very end of the book, the final chapter is about Mark Twain, who was a riverboat pilot at one point in his life. And he's taking a trip down the Mississippi River. And the river's been altered, I don't know how many times. And it's been constructed and directed. There are no more river pilots, beg your pardon, there are no more river pirates that stop along the way and terrorize people living on these islands or in these little ports of call. There is less uncertainty about having to navigate a river. The boats are more reliable. So you don't have an instance where you have a boat such as the Sultana that went north from New Orleans, completely overloaded with people, where the boiler blew up and until thousands of people were killed because they were thrown into the river or had to jump in the river and just drown or die. So anyway, the final chapter is just really ironic in that here's Mark Twain sailing down the river, and there's nothing really so adventuresome as it was earlier in history, because in 1811 there was an earthquake in the Memphis area that reportedly, not confirmed, reportedly altered the direction of the river, sending it like upstream instead of downstream.
Oh, wow.
It's called like the Big Shake.
Oh, wow. Was there flooding, I would assume, then? Or
yeah, there's a great deal of flooding along the Mississippi before they got it under control, before the Army Corps of Engineers took over.
You don't really think about earthquakes these days affecting places like the Mississippi that far into the central.
Well, it's a good subject to read into if you ever get the chance to Google it or find some literary material on the subject. And it was in like 1811, before there was a lot of recorded history out there. And it's called like the Great Shakes. And it was just so unusual in that the epicenter was in the Memphis, Tennessee area, as opposed to other areas where we hear of earthquakes taking place.
Yeah, that is interesting. It'd be interesting to see what there is to find about that. This show is heavily influenced by the Joe Rogan Experience, because I loved watching that show. And they have a guy who, like, his whole job for the show is when somebody mentions something like that, he pulls it up on the internet, or he pulls
research
up
person.
Yeah, and he's my favorite part of that show, because, like I said, it's fun to be able to learn things, and we live in an amazing age where we have information at our beck and call. So I don't have that on my show, but but it does kind of give lighten my heart when I think about there's so much to be pessimistic about, and I hear a lot of negativity in the language that I see, not just hear but read on the internet and in my interactions with people, and I think about I know we're faced with a lot of challenges, and there's a lot to be accomplished and a lot to address. But I also just I can't help but be optimistic when I think about all these things that didn't exist when I was little, and to see how much, even just when you think about the culture and media that like you said, when you were growing up, and you have access to how many books and how many TV shows and how many radio stations versus now, there's seemingly, I could not ingest all the information and all the media available to me in my lifetime. And everybody who's born right now is born into a world of guaranteed boredom has been eliminated, and the way that they, the certain diseases that have been eliminated, although some of them are coming back, but that seems to be like something that we've at least handled. We're still working on hunger and some disease, but man, boredom, we took care of boredom, and that's even something that there's a quote from when I was in London that sticks with me, that somebody said that to be tired of London is to be tired of life. And it's true not just in places like London. I think it's just true everywhere that there's time is precious, and I'm grateful and I'm glad to be alive. It's a miracle to be alive.
Absolutely.
You think about how all the sperm that could have fertilized that egg, and it's me,
Yep.
I don't know. I do think there's a lot of good in the world, and so I try to spread that positivity.
Absolutely.
This has been a great show so far. I hope you're having fun.
Thank you.
It seems like it's. I don't know. I always have fun doing these conversations. Is there anything that you want to ask me? I've been asking most of the questions.
No. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in the podcast. It's been fun, and hopefully we might be able to do it again.
Yeah, I would love to. All right. Well, thank you again, Chuck. For Chuck and myself, this is the Traveler signing off. Safe travels, everybody.